Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine War daily news update, the second part thereof for the 17th of March 2025, although I have done an absolute host of videos because it's all happening, everything's happening, and it's all quite alarming. We all have to keep smiling and upbeat, but my goodness, the world has turned on its head, or at least one major component, one big player in the world has appeared to have taken a trip to the upside down world. Anyway, let's talk about aid to Ukraine, and there's a lot to talk about in this video as well. Zelensky's announced an upcoming Ramstein meeting, so the Ukraine Defence Contact Group, quote, "We are preparing for Brussels." Zelensky said, according to the President, Defence Minister Rustem Umerov is currently organising the next meeting of the Ukraine Defence Contact Group. So that's really good news. That keeps the momentum going. There's been quite a lot of momentum recently. Ukraine will soon receive approximately 3.5 billion euros. I think it's about $3.8 million after the EU Council approved the third payment under the Ukraine facility. This brings the total disbursement to nearly 20 billion since the facility's launch a year ago. Is that I believe that's a 50 billion euro package of support from the EU over is it a 3-year time frame? Or is it a 5-year time frame? It might be a 3-year time frame. But anyway, that's really good. So that keeps that money flowing in, and hopefully they can use that, well, for whatever they need to. They'll work out. They don't need me to tell them what they need to use it for. Lithuania backs the EU plan for, well, what's this? A $43.5 billion military aid package to Ukraine, according to Reuters. Lithuania ranks among Europe's top defence spenders, allocating 2.85% of its GDP to defence in 2024, according to NATO estimates. Well, there is all this talk about an EU package, and different numbers are floating about at the moment. What we are hearing is that Hungary is to block the new EU military aid to Ukraine package, according to Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó. Szijjártó stated that Hungary will not allow taxpayer money to fund weapons shipments to Ukraine and instead advocates for peace negotiations, or as we translate that from the Hungarian directly, they are surrender negotiations. A 20 billion euro aid package is being discussed at today's EU meeting. Well, yeah, so we won't be dragged into this, says Hungary, opposing a $22 billion EU 20 billion euro package for Ukraine. Now, it's worth noting, and I could have given you much more formal renditions of this, but I quite like the little gif that's at the bottom here. But it's worth noting that Hungary, was it yesterday, went back on their veto for the extension of the EU sanctions. So EU sanctions on Russia take place for 6 months, and then every 6 months they have to extend them. So it's an ongoing thing, and every 6 months Hungary becomes difficult, and then things have to be put in place to keep Hungary on side. Well, they were vetoing the sanctions extension, and interestingly, we're now hearing that Secretary of State Marco Rubio phoned up Szijjártó and convinced him to back down on the issue of vetoing EU sanctions. After his call, they actually did back down and voted to extend the anti-Russian sanctions for the next 6 months. It does make you wonder. So the reason I'm including that here, because I don't normally do sanctions in the military aid bit. But one, I wonder what Marco Rubio promised to Szijjártó. Don't worry, this is going to be over soon. You won't have to extend them again because we'll be back into bed with Russia before you know it. Or something else. I don't know, because it doesn't look like the US is particularly enamored with continuing to keep things tough for Russia. But I'm including this here because wouldn't it be nice if Marco Rubio phoned up Peter Szijjártó and said, by the way, can you stop vetoing weapons shipments to, aid packages from Europe to Ukraine? Because at the end of the day, if the US doesn't want to give any more aid to Ukraine, then it would be nice if they still thought that Ukraine deserved some aid and needed aid and warranted aid. And actually that could come from Europe, and at the moment, Szijjártó and Hungary, you are stopping that from happening. So although we have put a stop to it in the US, can you please lift that veto and allow aid to go from Europe, from the EU? But no, sadly, it was only about the sanctions. But it'd be nice if that could be extended across to aid as well. A little helping push there. Now, Ukraine is running out of missiles for the SAMP-T air defense systems. We heard these are the Aster-30 missiles that are used in the SAMP-T air defense systems that can supposedly also take out ballistic missiles, although there are varying claims about that. Says the Italian Corriere della Sera. Kiev has urgently asked for Italy and France for at least 50 of those missiles to replenish stocks. I think the UK might be involved in the manufacture of those, even though it is a French-Italian air defense system. So that has then prompted Zelensky to say this: the armed forces of Ukraine will receive additional surface-to-air missiles for the IRIS-T, the SAMP-T, and the NASAMS air defense systems. Just hearing something like, is it 94% success rate for the NASAMS in taking down air threats? So that's really good. They've achieved an awful lot with them. I think something like 900 shootdowns or something. I don't know. Anyway, really good NASAMS stats that we're seeing, but they're going to get more of these munitions as well as artillery shells, and that's what he said in his last night's address to the nation. I hope that those missiles can come quickly. Now, there's an awful lot to say about what France, in particular Emmanuel Macron, has been stating of late. So he did say that France does not rule out supplying more Mirage 2000 jets. So a lot of people getting excited about this to Ukraine, including through third-party countries. So we have to see what other countries, I can't remember offhand what countries. There's a Middle Eastern country that operates a Mirage 2000 5-F. But anyway, Mirage 2000s. Zelensky, in a call with Macron, requested long-range missiles, so we know about that, and drones with deliveries under review. Okay, so that is a case of not ruling out additional Mirages, although they could well come from third-party countries. We are also seeing that Europe is preparing, and this is Macron saying this, Europe is preparing for the day after in Ukraine. France and the UK are finalising a plan to deploy, quote, a few thousand troops per nation in key areas like Kiev, Odessa and Lviv for training and long-term support. No Russian approval is needed. Ukraine is sovereign. So this is interesting. So it'll be a couple of thousand troops from France, for a couple of thousand from UK, and probably the rest from other coalition of the willing nations, making up possibly 10,000 troops. Now, that's not a lot, is it? But that would be possibly to do training and stuff, exactly what we talked about before, maybe freeing up troops to go to the front line. But I don't know if this is contingent upon there being a frozen front line and a ceasefire. I presume so. But then those troops can be then rotated. You know, those troops that are hanging out at the back of the UK and can be brought to the front line, even though there's no fighting, they can rotate, get trained up, and then become, if it does flare up again, bolster the forces that are already there. Essentially, that's how I would interpret that. But I'm reading between the lines and speculating. So Macron has voiced 4 points of security guarantees from Europe, which it is ready to provide to Ukraine. So continued support for Ukraine through new initiatives to supply equipment and provide the weapons that Ukraine needs as a priority. Second, assistance in reforms in the AFU, so the army, the Ukrainian armed forces, and rearmament, which will allow the army to effectively resist new Russian attacks. 3, deploying troops on the basis of the coalition of the willing in Ukraine, which we just talked about. And 4, strengthening European defence, additional investments and coordination between the armies. So the first 3 are very much to do with Ukraine, and the 4th one is to do with Europe rearming and bolstering defences in order to also, therefore, help Ukraine by giving a solid European military backstop, a deterrence to Russia, and the ability to continue to aid Ukraine with a bolstered European set of defence forces. So Macron told Le Parisien that Europe could send troops to Ukraine without Russia's consent. So that's the other bit I forgot to focus on. That's really important. Because in the moment Russia's saying, and we're hearing today that Russia has said a hard line to, we need an absolute ironclad guarantee that Ukraine will not accede to NATO. Now, the US appeared to be, and Mark Rutte reiterated what I think was a US stipulation, that Ukraine will not be joining NATO. But then Ukraine have come out today and said, no, we need, one of our red lines is EU and NATO. So NATO is a bit of a problem, and it might end up having to be NATO falling apart and then a European coalition of the willing equivalent to which Ukraine joins, or which is covered by that. Now, the Franco-British plan already interests several countries. The goal isn't a mass of soldiers, but a few thousand for training in Kyiv, Odessa, Lviv, as I mentioned. It's our support. Ukraine is sovereign, and Putin has no say, he stressed. That's what we want to do. Doesn't matter what you say, Poots. Now, we have Keir Starmer from the UK talking about this as well. The coalition of willing is preparing a peacekeeping force of over 10,000 troops for Ukraine, backed by 35 nations. UK PM Keir Starmer said, quote, "The world needs action now. Military leaders will meet in London this week to finalise those plans." So that is coming about. And actually, Starmer talked about this weekend. He said, we've done the rhetoric, now we actually need to do the actual stuff. We need to do this. So, finally a coalition gets some troops, but 10,000 is not a lot, but then they won't be used for operating and monitoring the front line. They'll be used in different ways. The UK is ready to keep its military presence in Ukraine indefinitely, according to the Times. So not only that, but Keir Starmer has apparently, at least the government official has apparently stated that British forces will remain as long as needed. So this could go on for years. This is a long-term commitment for the UK at least, as long as needed to uphold peace agreements and to deter Russia, of course. I guess rather like you've seen in Germany since the Second World War, really. Germany, speaking of which, Germany, and this is Annalena Baerbock, who is still the foreign minister as a member of the coalition government, what's left of it, but the Greens won't be in coalition when the new government comes into force, sadly, because actually they've done a really good job. They've been the most vocal defenders of Ukraine in the government, actually. Germany will allocate another 3 billion euros to help Ukraine. So this is kind of what's been talked about a lot. This is the realization of what German aid to Ukraine and others had said previously, which is, all the scare stories about, Germany are going to give half as much aid as they gave last year to Ukraine. Yep, no, they budgeted for just a small amount, but as they did the year before, you budget this foundation and then you build on it throughout the year. So actually, we're going to appropriate more and more and more. And in the end, they gave whatever it was, 7 billion, 8 billion last year. So that I think they appropriated 4 billion or put aside 4 billion for aid to Ukraine for this year. And everyone's like, there's 3 billion, then takes that to 7 billion, right? So which is broadly in line with what we saw in the previous year. So Germany will allocate that 3 billion to help Ukraine. And in total, Berlin will provide Kyiv with 7 billion in 2025, according to Annalena Baerbock. So that's good news. And German aid to Ukraine just gives us an update with what's been actually delivered in the past 4 weeks to Ukraine from Germany. So we've had 3 Cheetah self-propelled anti-aircraft guns. These are the Gepards, but the Cheetah is a Dutch slight upgrade. It's got a better radar on board. Gepard means Cheetah in I presume German, and the English translation of Cheetah, when that's used, it's actually referring to the Dutch variant. 30 drone detection sensors, 30 Girion RCS UGVs, unmanned ground vehicles, 50 Vector drones, these are aerial drones, 24 FFG MRAPs. So those MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles, don't have them there. They're based on the American BAT UMG, and then they've had to be brought over to Germany, then upgraded, and I don't know if they turn them into MRAPs or whether they're already kind of MRAPs. So anyway, they become the FFG MRAPs. So 24 of those, 2 mine plows, 2 Vicent 1 mine clearing tanks, 2 border protection vehicles, and then 100 man-portable mine clearing systems, a load of rounds for Gepards, a load of assault rifles of differing types, mortar shells, ammunition, artillery ammunition, 122 and 155 mil shells, infrared binoculars, laser rangefinders, in 487,000 first aid kits, and they've pledged some 279 more laser range finders. So the Germans coming up with the goods there. And short addendum, they've also delivered an unknown amount of Iris-T SL missiles, and ammunition for Leopard 1A5 main battle tanks and ammunition for Marder 1A3 infantry fighting vehicles, and also pledged a further 10 anti-drone sensors and jammers. So Germans still continuing to give an awful lot of kit to the Ukrainians there. And it's interesting to hear from Armin Papiger, the Rheinmetall CEO. We build factories faster in Germany than in Ukraine. Bureaucratic barriers in Germany have been almost completely removed, Papiger stated. He cited rapid approvals granted within weeks for key projects in Germany, including Europe's largest ammunition plant in Lower Saxony and factories producing components for the F-35 fighter jet. By contrast, similar processes in Ukraine have proven considerably slower. This is interesting. So first of all, there's that Soviet bureaucratic mindset that exists in and across Ukraine, which is what they're trying to get over, but it's really difficult. It's absolutely inbuilt into the system and into the people in Ukraine. That is something the armed forces have been trying to get over in the way they organise themselves. We hear a lot about NCOs, these non-commissioned officers, and being able to have greater independence or the ability to make decisions themselves further down the chain of command. And all that's getting away from the Soviet mindset within the military, but also that exists right across society with regard to bureaucracy and paperwork, getting things done and sorted out. And if you want to set up a big factory in Ukraine, it is apparently very difficult. Whereas Germany, interestingly, probably to do with trying to re-stimulate their economy by making it easier to start up, to build factories essentially here. But, make it easier to do things that will stimulate economic growth and industrial output. It appears that it's easier to build these factories in Germany. And so Papiger, rather than set up more things in Ukraine, where I guess you'd also have to kind of build them underground, and it's going to be much more difficult than building a factory in Germany where you won't have those considerations. So it appears that they are favouring Germany at the moment. Germany to Ukraine says there's been a lot of fake news circulating, and I reported this, but also said that it's coming from Spiegel, but I've not seen the original, and there are lots of people saying that, not too sure about this, so hold your horses. So he said that there's a lot of news circulating or rumours circulating around a non-existent Spiegel report claiming the upcoming delivery of Taurus cruise missiles from Germany. So he said, I'm going to write a piece on it. So here is his piece. Let's just go. I mean, it's as you can see, a very sizable piece. So we'll just go. So to the summarise, sorry, Germany to Ukraine, to be so dismissive of all that wonderful information. One should note that several steps have to be taken before a delivery to Ukraine could be carried out. This is likely to be the case at the end of the year. However, I'd like to point out that once again, this is only a theoretical scenario. The timeline could shift by several months depending on how long coalition talks take place, whether there are problems with the training of Ukrainian soldiers or with the integration of the cruise missile and so on. I very much hope that this article has provided the help needed. So but essentially it might happen by the end of the year, but with some caveats. Now, although this was written before the elections, the key point here, in the case of Taurus, two factors in particular determine how quickly a delivery can be carried out: the training of Ukrainian soldiers and the integration of the cruise missile into a launch platform. I was wondering how independent it is from the US. So we know that the Storm Shadow had an issue with needing the US, where Scalp-EG, I presume, doesn't. And when they shut down the intelligence sharing, the rumour was that also shut down the ability to use the UK provided Storm Shadow cruise missiles. So yeah, how long will it take to integrate them onto the planes in Ukraine? Well, actually, we have heard from the guy who is on the German side of the Taurus manufacturing, going against the German government earlier in the war, saying, well, actually, they got Storm Shadows and Scalp-EG sorted out within, really quick time frame. So we could do that too with the Taurus. Where there's a will, there's a way. Experimental Ukrainian Interceptor drone has been armed with shotguns here. So it is not the first one, but this is another shotgun drone, which appears to be a fixed wing drone as opposed to like a quadcopter that we've seen previously. And therefore, I'm imagining it can stay in the air for a lot longer, which means that it can patrol the skies and shoot down enemy drones if it comes across them. But there you go. That's a new innovation there. Now, here we have some footage of a Ukrainian MiG-29 releasing 4 GBU-39 small diameter bombs on a Russian position while performing a barrel roll. Let's have a look at that in action. And there we go. So those 4 bombs going off to somewhat precisely hit their target. And that plane rolls away. Just thought I'd show you that for all for a bit of light entertainment. Okay, Clash Report here reporting, actually NBC News poll really is reporting this. A new poll on NBC News is stating that American sympathies in the war between Ukraine and Russia and a view on Trump's position sharply diverge. So 62%, so the poll was conducted March the 7th to March the 11th, surveyed 1,000 voters registered voters nationally, margin of error plus or minus 3.1 percentage points. So, are your sympathies more with Ukraine, more with Russia, and with neither side? So 61% sympathise with Ukraine, 35% with neither side. Then from what you've seen, heard and read, are Trump's sympathies more with you? So is Trump's sympathies more with Ukraine? 8% think that Trump sympathises with Ukraine. So that drops absolutely hugely. 49% think more with Russia. So almost half of the American population think that Trump is more aligned with Russia, and then slightly more than the voters themselves think that Trump is neither doesn't sympathise with either side over the other. Interesting. Also worth noting that Oryx numbers, so Oryx, the loss aggregator, also has many articles on what different countries give to Ukraine, a bit like we've seen Germinate Ukraine does on his site just for Germany. Very detailed analysis of everything that Germany has both delivered and pledged to Ukraine. Well, Oryx does that as well. And this is in answer to those people that say, well, Europe needs to step up. It's interesting. There's a big difference between the amount of money given to Ukraine and the amount of kit that gets to Ukraine or is pledged to Ukraine. So money doesn't always necessarily translate to kit, and it depends how you evaluate your aid packages. So if you're doing book value and then adjusting for inflation and whatnot, then, and this is one of the criticisms of the US, is that you're not giving like money. Obviously, you're not taking money out of the bank and going and giving that to Ukraine. What you're doing is you're giving a bunch of kit that often isn't being used, sitting in a dusty yard in Arizona or something. You're taking that kit and you are giving that kit to Ukraine, and that kit might not always be replaced because sometimes it's obsolete, right? But you're still attaching this value to it. So there's going to be a discrepancy between value and kit, and depending on how countries do that, etc., etc. So in a sense, it's quite revealing to just say, okay, forget that because it's complicated and everyone does this in a different way. So let's just talk about actually how many tanks have you given and how many this have you given. Now, the caveat to doing that is that the US has supplied an absolute ton of artillery ammunition and missiles and rockets and mines and cluster munitions and just small arms ammunition, etc., etc. And so, you know, these kind of lists will miss out a really, really significant component of the aid that's been given to Ukraine. They've been absolutely clamoring for that kind of stuff, and the US stepped up and delivered a lot of that stuff. They've ramped up their manufacturing of that stuff. It's interesting to see what's going to happen going forward, because now they've got that capacity in place. They're not going to have the demand because the US isn't going to be giving this stuff to Ukraine unless nations like European nations buy it off the US to get to Ukraine. So anyway, it's just there are some vast differences between Europe and the US. Now, it's worth noting that the US has a bigger population than the US, of course. But nonetheless, 51 aircraft to 0 aircraft from the US, 51 European aircraft, or 51 aircraft from European nations. 73 helicopters, USA is given 21. 887 tanks, US is given 31. 887 to 31. 1,086 infantry fighting vehicles to 300. 183 pieces of towed artillery to the US's 259. Interesting that the US has given a more towed artillery. Self-propelled artillery, this is insane. 762 artillery pieces on tracks usually, or wheels actually, with the case of Caesar and actually Archer. 762 Europe has given, 18 the US. Wow. Multiple launch rocket systems like HIMARS, Europe has given 78. USA has given 40. And Patriot or SAMP-T batteries, actually Europe's given 6 Patriot or SAMP-Ts and the US has given 2 batteries. So absolutely phenomenal difference there. And I think that's a good corrective. And if you want to throw that in people's faces who keep saying we've given 300 billion, Europe needs to step up, that needs to be placed underneath Donald Trump's nose, that sheet, and say, can you read that please? And then probably, although there are those caveats I talked about, but probably after reading that, shut up. Okay, Financial Times is reporting that EU is considering building an intelligence satellite network amid doubts over Washington's commitment to European security. So we're doubting the US's commitment to our security, and we're also worrying about the vulnerabilities of relying on Starlink with regard to having to rely on a single human being who is quite thin-skinned and volatile. Right, Macron, speaking about SAMP-T and SAMP-T, Macron has said those who buy Patriot systems should be offered the new generation Franco-Italian SAMP-T. So that's a SAMP-T NG, I think it is. That's supposed to be better than the Patriot PAC-3. It's not yet built, but they're designing and sorting out now. Those who buy F-35s should be offered Rafale. I mean, the difference with the airplanes or aeroplanes is that they are different generation fighters, really. The Rafale doesn't do what the F-35 does, but be warned when you get into conversations of what's better. Because it's like saying, I don't know, like my Vauxhall Zafira, which is like a glorified estate car, but you can pop up 2 seats in the back, right? My Vauxhall Zafira is not as good as a Maserati sports car. And you're like, yeah, so you might like a Maserati, you might get to 0 to 60 a lot quicker than my Vauxhall Zafira, but you're not putting a bunch of kids in the back and taking them bowling, right? Or you're not putting the seats down and whacking in a couple of lawnmowers. So what's better? Well, it depends what you use it for. Okay, so how good something is goal orientated. What's your goal? So when it comes to an F-35 against a Rafale, well, how do you use these planes? What sort of thing are you doing with them? And how much they cost? Like my Vauxhall Zafira, I can get 3 of them for the cost of a Maserati. So, everyone's laughing. So if you want a fleet of planes that can do X and Y, and they're cheaper to operate, they're cheaper to maintain, they are cheaper to buy, and you can carry this kind of load and do this kind of mission, if that's what we want to do and that's how we want it to be, then the Rafale is better than the kind of, scare quotes, better 6th generation stealth bomber. If we don't need stealth and we need this kind of mission and we're looking at this kind of price range, then the Rafale is better. So, it's easy to say the F-35 is a better plane, but there are different metrics of evaluation. So just be warned about that. What's this? So the Danish came out and announced something, which is quite interesting. Faisal Islam points it out here from the BBC. He says, interesting timing for the Danish military to tweet about certifying EU-made French Air Force A400Ms for landing on Greenland's icy runways when they normally use US-made Hercules C-130Js. Is this Denmark just making a statement to the US saying, we're going to certify these planes, these are European planes, and we're going to be using these planes because actually we want to start moving away from reliance on American defense tech? As Islam continues, the attached article says the French Air Force resupplied Arctic Command in northern Greenland too with the A400M and will now help in the resupply of 2 remote bases in Greenland, Station Nord and Mestersvig, and points out that the Airbus can carry twice the load of the C-130. Also, Mark Carney's first cabinet meeting with Canadian Defence Minister goes on CBC after that cabinet meeting, to say that the PM has directed him to review Canada's purchase of the fleet of US-made F-35 jets. Quote, the PM has asked me to examine alternative options to purchasing 88 from US, i.e. from Europe. Although the first 16, I think, have to be bought, the rest of them they can get out of buying. It appears that Canada is reviewing the offer by Sweden's Saab to assemble Gripens in Canada as an alternative to the F-35, made in the country whose leader routinely suggests its abolition. The current Gripen supply chain sees 37% of the parts made in the UK, according to Saab. So, that's the alternative to potentially buying. So Gripen could be on the cards, Rafale could be on the cards. And of course, Mark Carney today is meeting Macron, going to Europe before going to the US, meeting with the EU leaders, meeting with British and French leaders, so on and so forth. And I think, did Mark Carney then say today that Canada is the most European of non-European nations? There's a move to get closer to Europe, to maybe eschew the American industries and dependence on them in favour of getting closer to Europe. Just in, Lithuania is significantly expanding its defence industry to enhance national security, focusing on producing more ammunition, explosives and drones, as well as increasing capacity for building and repairing heavy weaponry. Key initiatives include industrial production hubs for ammunition, explosives, drones and maritime defence, a venture capital fund to finance the defence sector, and establishing new military training zones. Defence Minister has emphasised a need for self-sufficiency, aiming to produce 85,000 anti-tank mines with a €50 million budget. Lithuania also plans to develop an integrated supply chain for ammunition to support both its own forces and NATO allies. The government is engaging with Poland and US, Germany, Ukraine and Nordic countries for defence cooperation. With concerns over recent sabotage incidents in the Baltic Sea, NATO has stepped up patrols. Lithuania is adopting a wartime mindset, planning to spend 12 to 13 billion euros more on defence by 2030. Public interest in civil resistance training has surged, with 115,000 citizens signing up in early 2025, reflecting growing fears of a potential Russian threat. Just thought that was an interesting little insight into Lithuania there. And then finally, just on to this from a Russian propagandist, Kashavarova. So she's sobbing into her channel because the Chinese won't team up with the oh-so-kind Russians for drones, opting instead for those pesky Ukrainian companies. Interesting observation here. Let's go into it. So, one of my friends, she says, travelled to China to negotiate with factories about supplying components for electronic warfare and drones. He couldn't get anywhere. Everywhere he went, they were yellow and blue flags and signs saying glory to Ukraine. Even though the president said the drone industry could reach 1 trillion rubles, our adversaries are still ahead of us both in quantity and variety. The industry's development pace is still extremely slow. That's because the Russian military leadership subconsciously believes weapons should be expensive, bulky, and take 2 or 3 hours of tedious setup to deploy. Wow. Interesting insight there. And just when we think, China is one, they are really helping helping Russia. Well, actually, although they might be doing that to a very significant degree, it appears they're also helping Ukraine. And like I've said before, China's not ideologically aligned to Russia. China will help Russia if it is useful for them to do so. They are transactional, actually, in terms of they'll just work to whatever is the advantage to them. They don't think in terms of ideology, I don't think. And so they are just as likely to help Ukraine if they see it as useful for them to do so as they are Russia. So that's just my opinion, and I'll stick with it. So there you go. Thank you very much for watching. Take care, guys, and I'll speak to you soon. Please remember to tie a knot in your pajamas. No, please remember to check out the ATP Geopolitics and Rick the Ukrainian and Roman Trochimets NAFO truck campaign. We are at 59%. We've gone up 1% today, so that is amazing. If you can help us to reach our goal, then I will be super happy. Basically, check out if you don't know what's going on here. Oh, Remy, thank you for that, with some Canadian love there. I think if that's the same Remy I'm thinking about, you can check out the donor wall. But I have done a campaign fundraiser launch video. Did one earlier, one of my 74 videos I've done to date already. You can check that out, and it gives you a real good sense of where this is being spent, who the units are that are going to receive them. I also talked a little bit about the previous fundraiser for NAFO and the previous fundraiser for Car for Ukraine, where we drove out some of those trucks to Ukraine, and we've seen them get to the units that need them. So that's absolutely fabulous. Anyway, take care, everybody. I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips.